Commander Marcus Chun had never wanted to be a diplomat, but the universe had a strange sense of humor. And here he stood in a room full of creatures that could snap him in half without trying. The Galactic Council Station was massive, beyond anything humans had ever built. And Marcus felt very small as he looked around the negotiation chamber, where representatives from 12 different species sat in curved seats that rose like stadium bleachers around a central platform humanity had only discovered faster than light travel 5 years ago. And now they were here, asking for a seat at the table like a new kid, showing up at school and hoping someone would let him sit with them at lunch. The problem was that nobody seemed interested in sharing their table. The Valkyrie delegation sat directly across from the human team, and their leader had been staring at Marcus for the past hour with an expression that suggested she found him about as impressive as a piece of furniture. High Matriarch Sylveth was tall, nearly 7 feet, with skin that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue depending on the light, and her eyes were solid gold without any visible pupils, which made it impossible to tell exactly where she was looking. Though Marcus had a pretty good guess she was looking at him, and she was not impressed. The Valkyrie do not form alliances with species who have not proven themselves in the fires of conflict, Sylveth said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber despite how quietly she spoke, as if the room itself wanted to make sure everyone heard her rejection. Marcus glanced at Ambassador Chun, no relation despite the shared name, who was leading the human delegation and looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 3 hours. With respect, High Matriarch, Ambassador Chen said carefully, humanity has faced many conflicts throughout our history, and we have always internal squabbles. Sylveth interrupted, waving one clawed hand dismissively, and Marcus noticed that her fingers had an extra joint compared to human hands, which somehow made the gesture even more condescending. You fought among yourselves like children arguing over toys, and this does not impress the Valkyrie. Marcus leaned toward Lieutenant Park, who was standing next to him and looking equally frustrated by how badly this was going. At this rate, we will be here for another century, Marcus whispered, forgetting for just a moment that the small device attached to his collar was designed to translate everything he said into whatever language the listener needed to. Here, maybe I should just propose marriage to her, he muttered sarcastically. Apparently that is how alliances work in old movies. The chamber went silent, not the polite silence of people waiting for someone to finish speaking, but the sudden and complete silence of every single being in the room, turning to stare at one specific person. That person was Marcus. He felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes on him, and his stomach dropped as he realized that his translator had picked up every word he had just said and broadcast it clearly across the entire chamber. High Matriarch Sylveth had risen from her seat, and her gold eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him want to run, hide, or possibly both at the same time. Oh no, Lieutenant Park whispered beside him. What did you just do? Marcus wanted to explain that it was a joke, that humans said stupid things when they were frustrated, that he absolutely did not mean to propose anything to anyone, especially not a 7-foot-tall alien warrior queen who looked like she could tear him apart with her bare hands. But before he could say any of that, Sylveth spoke a single word that changed everything. Accepted. The silence in the chamber somehow became even more silent, which Marcus had not thought was possible. Ambassador Chun made a small choking sound, and Marcus saw several of the other alien delegations exchange looks that he could not quite read, but definitely did not seem good. I am sorry, Marcus said slowly, his voice coming out higher than usual, but I think there might have been a translation error, because it sounded like you just said, accepted, Sylveth repeated. And this time, there was something almost like a smile on her face. though on her features it looked more like a predator spotting wounded prey. "You have invoked the Valtheran human, and I accept your offer." A murmur rippled through the chamber, and Marcus heard words he did not understand being whispered by beings he could not identify. "The Valtheran," one of the other delegates said, in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed, "has not been invoked in 3,000 cycles." "What is a Valtheran?" Marcus asked. Though he was becoming increasingly certain that he did not actually want to know the answer, Sylph stepped down from her delegation's platform and walked toward him. Each step deliberate and measured, and Marcus found that his feet were rooted to the floor. No matter how much his brain was screaming at him to move, she stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he had to crane his neck to look up at her face. "The Valtheran is the most sacred bond of the Volcari people," she said, and her voice had shifted from cold dismissal to something warmer and far more terrifying. "It is an alliance forged through union, a marriage that binds not just two individuals, but two peoples together." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he finally understood exactly what he had accidentally done. To refuse the Valtheran after it has been invoked and accepted, Sylveth continued, leaning slightly closer, is considered the gravest insult to the Volcari, and it would mean immediate and total war between our species. Behind him, Marcus heard Ambassador Chun say a word that definitely should not have been broadcast by her translator, but absolutely Sylveth straightened and looked around the chamber at all the watching delegations. The human has shown courage that his species' reputation did not suggest, she announced. "The Valtheran trials will begin in 3 cycles, and if this human proves worthy, the Valkyrie will have a new alliance." She looked back down at Marcus, and this time her smile was unmistakable. "I look forward to seeing what you are made of, human." And with that, she turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving Marcus standing in the middle of a room full of frozen aliens and one very angry human ambassador, Commander Chun. Ambassador Chun said in a voice that was perfectly calm in the way that volcanoes are perfectly calm right before they erupt, "Would you care to explain to me how you accidentally proposed marriage to an alien warrior queen?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out, because honestly, he did not have a good explanation for how his life had just gone so completely and utterly sideways. All he knew was that he had made a joke, and now he was apparently engaged to the most terrifying woman in the galaxy, and everyone was still frozen, staring at him, waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus had no idea what would happen next, but he had a terrible feeling that it was going to be very, very interesting. The private chamber where Marcus found himself 3 hours later was nothing like the grand negotiation hall, and somehow that made everything feel even more serious. Ambassador Chun had spent the first 2 hours yelling at him through a secure communication channel back to Earth, and Marcus had learned more creative combinations of curse words than he had thought possible from a career diplomat. Now he sat alone at a small table made from some kind of dark crystal, waiting for High Matriarch Sylveth to arrive and explain exactly what kind of mess he had stumbled into. The door opened without any sound, and she walked in with the same predatory grace that had terrified him in the main chamber. But this time, there was something different about her expression. She almost looked amused. "You may breathe, human," she said as she sat down across from him. "I am not going to eat you, despite what your face suggests you are thinking." Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and tried to force his shoulders to relax. "I need you to understand," he began, "that what I said was not a real proposal. It was just something humans say when they are frustrated. We call it sarcasm, and—" "I know," Sylveth interrupted, and her gold eyes studied him with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his thoughts. "Do you truly believe I have led my people for 60 cycles without learning to recognize when someone is making a jest?" Marcus blinked at her, confusion temporarily overriding his fear. "If you knew it was a joke," he said slowly, "then why did you accept?" Sylveth leaned back in her chair, and for a moment she looked almost tired, which was strange to see on someone who radiated power and danger from every part of her being. "Because I have been searching for a way to break my people free from their isolation," she said. "And you handed me the perfect opportunity wrapped in the disguise of human foolishness." She stood and walked to a window that looked out over the vast expanse of the station, stars glittering in the distance like scattered diamonds. "The Valkyrie were once explorers," she continued. "We traveled the galaxy and learned from every species we encountered. But 3,000 cycles ago, we turned inward, convinced that other races had nothing to offer us." "What changed?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious despite his fear. "Fear," Sylvia said simply. "There was a war, a terrible conflict that cost us half our population. And afterward, my ancestors decided that isolation was safer than connection. And we have been shrinking ever since." She turned back to face him, and in the starlight, her purple skin seemed to glow with an inner light. "I have watched your species since you first stumbled into the galactic community," she said. "You are soft, weak, fragile compared to most races. And yet you survived on a planet that should have killed you 1,000 times over." Marcus was not sure if that was a compliment or an insult, so he stayed quiet. "Your world has predators with claws and fangs, extreme temperatures that swing from burning to freezing, diseases that mutate faster than medicine can chase them, and natural disasters that reshape your continents," Sylveth listed. "Any other species would have died, but humans just kept going." She walked back to the table and placed both hands on its surface, leaning toward him. "That is what my people have lost," she said. "That stubborn refusal to accept defeat, that ability to adapt to anything the universe throws at you. And I believe that by binding our peoples together, perhaps we can remember what we used to be." Marcus stared at her, his mind racing as he tried to process everything she was saying. "So you are using me," he said finally, "as a political tool to change your society." "Yes," Sylveth admitted without any shame. "But I am also offering you something real. An alliance with one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Protection and technology that would take your people centuries to develop on their own. And a partner who will stand beside humanity against any threat." She straightened and crossed her arms. "The question is whether you are brave enough to see this through, or whether you will run back to your soft human world and hide." Marcus thought about Ambassador Chun, who was probably still composing angry messages to him, and about Earth, which desperately needed allies in a galaxy that saw them as newcomers barely worth noticing. He thought about his own fear, which was very real and very loud in his head. And then he thought about what Sylveth had said about humans refusing to accept defeat. "What exactly are these trials?" he asked. "The ones you mentioned." A genuine smile crossed Sylveth's face, and it transformed her features from terrifying to something almost beautiful. "The Valtheran requires you to complete 3 challenges that prove your worth as a mate and an ally," she explained. "They were designed for Valkyrie warriors, and they are not easy." "Has anyone ever died during these trials?" Marcus asked, already knowing he would not like the answer. "Many," Sylvia said cheerfully. "But I have faith that you will find a way to survive." "Human, you seem like the stubborn type." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands and wondered how his life had come to this point. "My government is going to be very upset about this," he said. "Your government will thank you when this is over," Sylveth replied. "And if they do not, I will personally explain to them why they should." There was something in her tone that suggested her explanation would involve a lot of sharp objects and very little patience. Marcus looked at this alien woman who had accepted his accidental proposal and turned it into a galaxy-changing political move. And he made a decision. "All right," he said. I am in. Sylveth nodded as if she had expected nothing less. Then rest well tonight. Human, she said as she moved toward the door. The first trial begins tomorrow. And you will need every bit of that famous human endurance. She paused at the doorway and looked back at him. And Marcus, she added, using his name for the first time. Do try not to die. I would hate to start a war over a corpse. Then she was gone. And Marcus was left alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he had just agreed to compete in Deadly Alien. Trials to marry a woman he had met less than a day ago. He pulled out his communication device and stared at the 17 unread messages from Ambassador Chun, all of which probably contained more creative profanity. Earth is never going to believe this, he muttered to himself, but somewhere beneath the fear and the confusion, Marcus felt something else stirring. It felt a lot like excitement. He had come to the Galactic Council as a nobody, a junior officer assigned to stand in the background and look professional while the real diplomats did their work, and now he was about to fight for humanity's future in the most literal way possible. His grandmother had always said that life was what happened while you were busy making other plans. And Marcus suspected she would have appreciated the irony of this situation, though she probably would have also told him to stop making jokes around aliens with universal translators that seemed like good advice for the future, assuming he survived long enough to have a future. The transport ship set Marcus down in a forest that looked like something from a nightmare. With trees so tall they disappeared into clouds, the color of rust, and shadows that seemed to move even when nothing was there. The first trial was called The Hunt, and Marcus had been given exactly one piece of information about it before being dropped into this alien wilderness. He had to track and capture a creature called a Varnke before 3 days passed, or he would fail and humanity would be at war with one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. No pressure at all. The Volcari. Observers floated overhead in small hover platforms, watching his every move and probably betting on how quickly he would die. Marcus took a deep breath of air that smelled like copper and something vaguely sweet, then began walking in a direction that seemed as good as any other. He had studied everything available about the Vonkai on his way here, which unfortunately was not much, because the Valkyrie considered sharing detailed information about their trials to be cheating. What he did know was that the creature was roughly the size of a large bear, had 6 legs, armor plates covering most of its body, and could run at speeds that would make a cheetah jealous. He also knew that every Valkyrie who had ever completed this trial had done so by overpowering the beast in direct combat, using their natural strength and reflexes to wrestle it into submission. Marcus had neither of those things. What he did have was a basic survival kit, a knife that looked embarrassingly small compared to Valkyrie weapons, and roughly 30 years of being a stubborn human who refused to quit. The first day passed without any sign of the creature, but Marcus found tracks that showed where it had passed recently. Deep gouges in the soft ground that suggested something heavy and fast. He followed the tracks until darkness fell, then climbed one of the massive trees and secured himself to a branch, sleeping in short bursts while trying not to think about what might be lurking in the shadows below. Second day, he found fresh droppings and claw marks on the trees, signs that the Vonkai was close, and he picked up his pace despite his aching legs and growling stomach. But every time he got close, the creature seemed to sense him coming and fled deeper into the forest. By the end of the second day, Marcus was exhausted, covered in scratches from pushing through alien underbrush, and seriously questioning whether this had been a good idea. He could hear the Valkyrie observers talking on their platforms above, their words translated by his collar device. The human will fail soon, one of them said. Look at him stumble. He can barely walk. I expected him to die on the first night, another replied. At least he has provided more entertainment than most. Marcus gritted his teeth and kept walking on the third day. He finally caught sight of the Vonkai, and it was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The creature was covered in plates that looked like dark metal, and its 6 legs moved with a fluid grace that belied its massive size. And when it turned to look at him, Marcus saw eyes that held an intelligence far beyond what he had expected from a beast. It watched him for a moment, then turned and ran, disappearing into the trees faster than Marcus could blink. But Marcus did not chase it at full speed like the Valkyrie would have done instead. He jogged. He kept a steady pace, following the tracks that the creature left in its wake. And when he lost the trail, he used every tracking skill he had learned during survival training back on Earth hours past. And the Vornkai ran, and Marcus followed the creature's stop to rest. And Marcus kept jogging. It drank from a stream. And Marcus drank from the same stream 10 minutes later. It found a cave to hide in. And Marcus sat outside the cave entrance, waiting. The Valkyrie observers grew quieter as they watched, their confusion obvious, even though Marcus could not see their faces. "What is he doing?" one of them asked. "He should be attacking." "I do not know," another answered. "I have never seen anyone hunt like this." What they did not understand was that Marcus was not hunting like a Valkyrie, was hunting like a human millions of years ago. Before humans had weapons or tools or fire, they had hunted by simply refusing to stop. Their prey would run, and humans would follow, and the prey would run again, and humans would follow again. And eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion while the humans just kept coming. It was called persistence hunting. And it was the reason humans had survived on a planet full of creatures faster, stronger, and deadlier than them. And now Marcus was using it on an alien world against an alien creature. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could almost hear his ancestors cheering him on by the second day of the chase. The Vornkai was slowing, its movements becoming sluggish and desperate, its eyes showing something that looked very much like fear, and Marcus just kept jogging on the third day of the hunt. With less than 6 hours remaining before his time ran out, the Vornkai finally stopped running. It lay on its side in a clearing, its massive chest heaving with exhaustion, its armored plates dull and scratched from its desperate flight through the forest. Marcus approached slowly, every muscle in his body screaming with pain, and he knelt beside the creature and placed one hand on its head. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "but I need to pass this test." The Vornkai looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn it nodded. He pulled a length of cord from his survival kit and carefully secured the creature's legs, completing the capture that the rules required above him. The Valkyrie observers had gone completely silent. Then his translator picked up a voice that he recognized as Sylveth's, speaking from somewhere in the distance. "He did it," she said, and there was something in her tone that sounded almost like pride. The human actually did it. Marcus sat down next to the captured Vonkai and laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest and startled the observers. He had passed the first trial, not through strength or speed, but through the most human trait of all. He had simply refused to stop. The second trial came 2 days later, after Marcus had recovered enough to walk without wincing. It was called the Endurance, and it involved pain, a lot of pain. Marcus was strapped to a frame in the center of a ritual chamber, while Valkyrie priests applied burning brands to his skin in patterns that held religious significance to their people. He was not allowed to cry out or ask them to stop, and if he did, he would fail. The pain was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced, a white-hot agony that seemed to reach into his very bones. And more than once he felt his vision start to go dark around the edges, but he held on, and somewhere around the 4th hour, when his mind had gone fuzzy from pain and exhaustion, something strange happened. He started making jokes. "Is this supposed to hurt more or less than stepping on a Lego?" he asked through gritted teeth. Because honestly, I have had worse experiences in my kitchen. The priest froze. Their burning implements held suspended in the air. What is a Lego? One of them asked. It is a small plastic brick that humans step on in the dark, Marcus explained, his voice cracking with pain but still somehow finding humor. It is considered one of the worst experiences known to our species. You are comparing this sacred ritual to stepping on a toy, another priest asked, sounding deeply offended. I am comparing all pain to stepping on Legos, Marcus replied. It helps me cope. From the side of the chamber, Marcus heard a sound that he would never have expected. South was laughing. The trials continued. And Marcus continued to make terrible jokes. And by the end of the ordeal, the priests were more confused than they had ever been by any candidate. But Marcus was still conscious, still breathing, and still stubbornly refusing to give up when they finally released him from the frame. He collapsed to his knees and looked up at Sylveth, who was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. How? She asked simply. Marcus managed a weak smile through cracked and bleeding lips. I will tell you a secret about humans, he said. We are not the strongest or the fastest, but we can take more punishment than almost anything in the universe and still get back up. He coughed and added, also, the jokes help. Sylveth shook her head slowly, but she was still smiling. 2 trials complete, she said. 1 remains. Marcus nodded, already dreading whatever came next, but he was still here, still alive, and still too stubborn to quit, and that would have to be enough. The night before the final trial, Sylveth came to Marcus's quarters unannounced. He was sitting on his bed, still covered in healing burns from the endurance ritual, staring at the wall and wondering how he had gotten himself into this situation. When the door opened and she walked in, he did not even have the energy to be startled. You look terrible, she said, which was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to him in days. Thank you, Marcus replied. I feel terrible, so at least my appearance is accurate. Sylveth sat down across from him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was surprisingly comfortable, which struck Marcus as strange, given that he was supposedly engaged to this woman and still knew almost nothing about her. The 3rd trial is the challenge, she finally said. Any Valkyrie can step forward and demand the right to fight you for my hand. And you must defeat them or everything you have endured means nothing. Marcus nodded slowly, having already guessed that the final trial would involve combat. There is a clan leader named Vethro who has already announced his intention to challenge you, Sylveth continued, a voice carefully neutral. He is the strongest warrior among my people and has killed 14 opponents in ritual combat. Wonderful, Marcus said flatly. That sounds like exactly the kind of fair fight I was hoping for. Sylveth's gold eyes studied him with that intense focus he had grown accustomed to. You know, she said, when you made that accidental proposal, I could have rejected it. There are ways to gracefully decline the Valtheran if both parties agree it was a misunderstanding. Marcus looked up at her, genuinely surprised. Then why did you accept? He asked. Because I saw something in you, she replied. In that moment of panic, when you realized what you had done, you did not immediately try to take it back or blame someone else. You just stood there, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that was completely impossible. She leaned forward slightly. That is a rare quality, the ability to face disaster without falling apart. And I wanted to see what else you were capable of. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the small room. And now you have seen, he said. You have seen me chase an animal until it collapsed, endure torture while making terrible jokes, and sit here wondering how I am supposed to fight someone who could probably pull my arms off without breaking a sweat. Yes, Sylveth agreed. I have seen all of that, and I have also seen something you have not noticed. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. When you tracked the Varnkai, Every Valkyrie watching assumed you would give up after the first day. And when you did not give up, they assumed you would collapse on the second day. And when you did not collapse, they watched you finally capture that beast, and they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. She turned back to face him. Fear, she said. They felt afraid of you, Marcus, because you showed them that humans do not stop, ever. No matter how impossible the odds. Marcus shook his head. Not understanding. How is that supposed to help me tomorrow? He asked. I cannot chase Vethril until he collapses from exhaustion. He would crush me long before that happened. Sylveth smiled, and there was something warm in her expression that he had not seen before. You are thinking like a Valkyrie, she said. You are assuming that the fight must be won through strength because that is how we have always done it. She walked back to him and knelt so that they were at eye level. But you are not a Valkyrie, she said. You are human, and humans have survived not by being stronger than their enemies, but by being clever, by adapting, by finding solutions that no one else would think of. Marcus stared at her, pieces clicking together in his mind. The rules of the challenge, he said slowly. What exactly do they say? That you must fight until one opponent yields or is unable to continue, Sylveth replied. There are no restrictions on weapons or tactics. Only that both fighters must start with the same equipment. The same equipment, Marcus repeated. Meaning if Vethril chooses to fight with just his claws, then I fight with just my hands. Correct. But if he chooses to use weapons or armor or anything else, then I get access to those same things. Also correct. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A spark of hope igniting where there had been only resignation. He will choose claws, he said, because he wants to humiliate me. To show everyone that humans are weak compared to Valkyrie. Almost certainly, Sylveth agreed. He is arrogant and believes you are beneath him. Marcus nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. Then I need to make him angry, he said. Angry enough to make mistakes. Angry enough to forget that he is supposed to be the superior warrior. Sylveth's smile widened. Now you are thinking like a human, she said. She reached out and placed one hand on his shoulder. Her touch surprisingly gentle despite the strength he knew those fingers possessed. Marcus, she said, I need you to understand something before tomorrow. What is that? I accepted your proposal for political reasons, she admitted. I saw an opportunity and I took it. But these past days have changed things. She met his eyes directly. I have watched you refuse to surrender when anyone else would have quit. I have heard you make jokes in the middle of agony because that is how humans cope with pain. And I have seen you face every impossible challenge with nothing but stubbornness and creativity. Her golden eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. I am no longer doing this just for politics, she said quietly. I am doing this because I believe you might actually be worthy of the Valtharan. And I want to see what our peoples could become together. Marcus felt his heart beating faster, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with his healing burns. Sylveth, he said, I need to tell you something too. She waited. I am terrified, he admitted. I have been terrified since the moment you accepted my stupid joke. And I have no idea if I can survive tomorrow. But I want you to know that somewhere along the way this stopped being about just preventing a war. He took her hand in his, marveling at how different their fingers looked intertwined. I actually want to win, he said. Not just for humanity, but because I think there might be something real here. Something worth fighting for. Sylveth squeezed his hand gently. Then fight, she said. Fight like a human. With every dirty trick and stubborn refusal to die that your species is famous for. She stood to leave, but paused at the door, and Marcus. Yes, if he kills you. I will personally ensure that his death is slow and painful. So try not to make me do that. Despite everything. Marcus laughed. I will do my best. He promised. She nodded once and left, and Marcus sat alone in the darkness. Thinking about tomorrow, he was still terrified, and now he had something else too. He had hope, and a reason to fight, and a plan forming in his mind that no Valkyrie would ever expect. Tomorrow he would face the greatest warrior their species had ever produced, and tomorrow he would show the galaxy what humans were really made of. The arena was packed with spectators from every species in the Galactic Council. All of them gathered to watch a fragile human face, the most dangerous warrior the Valkyrie had ever produced. Marcus stood on one side of the circular fighting pit. Feeling very small and very breakable, Everil stood on the opposite side. And he was everything Marcus had feared, and more. The Valkyrie warrior was nearly 8 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they had been carved from stone, and claws that gleamed like polished obsidian in the arena. Lights, his gold eyes burned with contempt as he looked at Marcus. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire arena without any effort. "I have killed warriors 3 times your size, human," Vethril announced. "I will make your death quick, as a kindness to the High Matriarch." Marcus took a deep breath and smiled. "That is very generous of you," he called back. "But I have a counteroffer." Vethril's eyes narrowed. "What counteroffer could a creature like you possibly make?" Marcus shrugged casually. Even though his heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his throat. "I offer you the chance to yield now," he said, "before I embarrass you in front of everyone you have ever known." The arena went silent for a moment, then erupted in laughter. Every Valkyrie in attendance found this hilarious, and even some of the other species were chuckling at the absurdity of this tiny human threatening their greatest champion. But Vethril was not laughing. His face had twisted into something ugly, exactly as Marcus had hoped. "I will tear you apart piece by piece," Vethril snarled. "I will make you scream for death before I grant it." "Ah," Marcus said. "So you want to draw this out then?" "Good to know." The ritual master stepped forward and announced the terms of combat, confirming what Sylveth had told him the night before. Vethril chose claws and natural weapons only. No armor, no tools. Marcus would have the same. The master raised his hand, and when it fell, the fight would begin. Marcus used those final seconds to look toward where Sylveth sat in the place of honor, and she met his eyes and gave him a small nod that meant more than any words could have. Then the hand fell, and Vethril charged. The Valkyrie moved faster than anything that Sci should be able to move, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Claws sweeping toward Marcus's head with enough force to take it clean off. But Marcus was not there. He had already thrown himself to the side, rolling across the dusty ground and coming up 5 feet from where he had been standing. Vethril's cut through empty air, and the warrior spun with a snarl of frustration. "Stand still and fight," he demanded. "I am fighting," Marcus replied. "Already moving again, just not the way you want me to." Vethril attacked again, and again Marcus dodged. Using every bit of speed and agility his human body possessed to stay just ahead of those deadly claws. He could not keep this up forever. He knew that. His body was already tired from the previous trials, and Vethril showed no signs of slowing down. But he did not need to dodge forever. He just needed to make Vethril angry enough to make a mistake. "You know," Marcus said as he ducked under another swipe, "I have been thinking about why you are so upset about this whole situation." Vethril lunged and Marcus rolled again, coming up behind the warrior. "Is it because the High Matriarch chose me over you?" Marcus continued. "Or is it because deep down you know that your people have been hiding from the galaxy for 3,000 years, and you are scared the change might be coming?" Vethril's response was a roar of rage that shook the arena. He attacked with wild fury, abandoning technique in favor of pure, overwhelming violence. And Marcus danced backward, barely staying ahead of the onslaught. "That is it." "Is it not?" Marcus said, breathing hard. "You are not fighting me. You are fighting the future." You are fighting the idea that maybe the Valkyrie have been wrong about everything." "Silence!" Vethril screamed. And he threw himself at Marcus with every ounce of his considerable strength. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. Instead of dodging sideways, he dropped flat onto his back. Vethril's momentum carried him forward, his claws sweeping through the space where Marcus's head had been a fraction of a second before, and Marcus kicked upward with both legs, catching Vethril in the stomach and using the warrior's own weight and speed to send him tumbling over Marcus and crashing into the arena wall before Vethril could recover. Marcus was on him. He grabbed a handful of arena dust and threw it directly into the warrior's golden eyes, then scrambled onto Vethril's back and wrapped both arms around the Valkyrie's thick neck. Thrall thrashed and roared, his claws swiping at his own back, trying to dislodge the human clinging to him like a particularly stubborn parasite, but Marcus held on. He held on when Vethril slammed backward into the wall, trying to crush him. He held on when the Fingidos warrior rolled across the ground, trying to shake him off. He held on when his arms screamed with exhaustion and his vision started to blur from the impacts. He held on because that was what humans did eventually, inevitably. Vethril began to slow. The lack of air was taking its toll, and the Valkyrie's movements became sluggish and uncoordinated. "Yield," Marcus gasped through gritted teeth. "Yield and this ends." "Never," Vethril managed, but his voice was weak. "Then I will hold on until you pass out," Marcus promised. "And then I will hold on some more. Because I am human, and we do not know when to quit." Vethril struggled for another 30 seconds. Then his body went limp. Marcus held on for another 10 seconds, just to be sure, then released his grip and rolled away. Lying flat on his back in the dust and gasping for air, the arena was completely silent. Then the ritual master stepped forward and made an announcement that echoed through the chamber. "The human has won. The third trial is complete. The Valtheran is fulfilled." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Valkyrie section of the audience began to pound their feet against the floor in a rhythm that Marcus slowly realized was applause. It started with just a few, but spread until the entire arena was shaking with the sound of Valkyrie approval. Sylve appeared beside him, helping him to his feet, and her face was shining with something that looked very much like joy. "You did it," she said. "You impossible, stubborn human. You actually did it." Marcus laughed weakly and leaned against her for support. "I told you," he said. "We do not know when to quit." The wedding ceremony happened 3 days later. After Marcus had recovered enough to stand without help, it was a grand affair, attended by delegations from every species in the Galactic Council, all of them watching as a human and a Valkyrie joined their peoples together for the first time in galactic history. At the reception afterward, a council diplomat approached Marcus with curiosity written clearly across his tentacled face. "I must ask," the diplomat said, "how did humanity plan such a brilliant political strategy? The accidental proposal, the trials, everything. It was masterfully executed." Marcus looked at Sylveth, who was standing beside him, and they both burst out laughing. "We did not plan any of it," Marcus admitted. "I made a sarcastic comment that got translated wrong. And then I just refused to die." The diplomat stared at him in disbelief. "You are saying this entire alliance between two of the most important species in the galaxy happened because of an accident and stubbornness?" "That is basically humanity's whole thing," Marcus confirmed. "We stumble into impossible situations, and then we are too stubborn to fail." Sylveth put her arm around Marcus and looked out at the crowd of aliens watching them. "That is what makes them dangerous," she said to the diplomat. "They do not know what they are doing, but they refuse to let that stop them." The diplomat wandered away looking deeply concerned, and Marcus suspected that the other species of the galaxy were going to be reassessing their opinions of humanity for a long time to come. Later that night, When the ceremony was over and they were finally alone, Sylveth turned to Marcus with a curious expression. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Any of it." Marcus thought about the past weeks. The terror, the pain, the moments when he'd been absolutely certain he was going to die. Then he thought about standing in this room with this incredible woman, who had seen something in him that he had not known was there, not even a little bit. Sage South smiled and took his hand. "Good," she said, "because I have been thinking about what comes next for our peoples, and I have some ideas that might require that famous human stubbornness." Marcus groaned good-naturedly. "Should I be worried?" "Almost certainly, and despite everything. Despite all the fear and pain and near-death experiences." Marcus could not help but smile. He had come to the Galactic Council as a nobody, and left as the husband of one of the most powerful women in the galaxy, all because of a joke, and somewhere out among the stars, the other species were learning a lesson that humanity's enemies had always learned the hard way. Humans might be soft, fragile, and prone to saying stupid things at the worst possible moments, but they never, ever gave up, and in the end, that made all the difference.